Hi, everyone. Again, my name's Anthony Zufelt, and I'm actually a senior solutions specialist with Applied. I'm kind of responsible for a variety of things, primarily around design technology and architecture, structure. And with that being said, I kind of want to be upfront and acknowledge that my views and thoughts in this webinar are probably going to be a little skewed towards those disciplines. So I guess to start off, I'd like to thank Applied Software for sponsoring this today. I think we're going to get to cover some pretty intriguing topics. And for everyone attending this webinar, I'd like to, say hi and thank you for joining us. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is these new features for Revit 21 and demo some of them live. I'm also going to give you some thoughts about these features and maybe even speculate on their potential uses. And I also want to say, just to clarify this, I'm not going to be covering every new feature. There's a ton that's available to talk about. This is a huge release, but we're going to talk about some of the ones that I personally believe are going to be impactful for segments of our industry. So I guess jumping into the new features for Revit 2021, I'd actually heard rumblings that this release was going to be a little bit more substantial than, a typical Revit release. But I got to say, this still kind of took me by surprise because there is a lot to unpack here. And some of it is fairly significant, especially in the downstream impacts for the AEC space. And as an aside, I've seen some people kind of knocking the features in this release, and I actually want to push back on that strongly. So look, I've got no problem complaining if I think a software release isn't up to par. And, to be honest, there's been plenty of those for Revit where I think they've been flat out mediocre. Then Autodesk has been, just sitting on their laurels. But that's absolutely not the case here. It's just not. And I'm going to talk more about this with some of the new features. But if you can keep this in mind today as we kind of run through things, the way you work in this software is the way you know how to work in it today. And as we learn how to use some of these new features, some of these new tools, I can assure you the way you work in Revit is going to change. Some areas only marginally, right? But in some areas, it's going to be significantly different and for the better. So how am I going to cover these features today? I'm going to start with this PowerPoint. I'm going to talk a whole bunch, so forgive me for that. But we're going to look at some of these new features at kind of a high level, and then we're going to jump into Revit and show some of these things live in a little bit more detail. I also kind of want to keep the Revit demo portion fairly platform agnostic. So less tied to specific disciplines, architect, structural engineer, MEP, whatever. And it's just more a comprehensive exposition on what has been, exposed in Revit 21. If you're looking for more specific information about your respective discipline, I encourage you to follow up with us and our team at Applied, and we are happy to work with you to show you a little bit more of what has direct implications for your day-to-day work. So I guess looking at these overall features inside of Revit 21, we've got a couple of really nice things here. And I guess at a platform level, there's a few things that I think are really, really significant. One of the first ones here is Dynamo 2.5. With that poll question I asked, the reason I ask is because the Dynamo 2.5 integration is huge. It is absolutely huge, and I'll stand behind this, but 2.5 Dynamo for Revit is the most important feature for Revit 2021. And I'll expand on that a little bit later. But let's go ahead and kind of run through some of these other features that we've got. So we've got some nice improvements with PDFs and image linking. We've also got some continued refinements with the BIM 360 project navigation. Then just as an FYI for you BIM 360 users out there, but this is another Autodesk tool that has been constantly receiving updates and feature improvements. I'm going to say that the BIM 360 public features roadmap isn't really the greatest. So you probably aren't aware of everything that's new there, but I just want you to know that it is continuously improving and iterating behind the scenes. So just because you've been using BIM 360 for the last year a certain way, there's going to be more features that you might not know about now. So maybe check those out. I guess jumping back into the Revit 21 here, there's also this new customized Revit workspace feature, and this shows up the first time you launch inside of Revit 21. And it's kind of something that you use to customize your Revit user interface to better fit your design persona, maybe as an architect or an engineer or whatever. But I'll be honest, this feature isn't really anything significant. It's just window dressing and nothing new. You've actually been able to do this inside of the Revit options for years. This is just a new way of managing this. But I just wanted to at least get you guys exposed so that you're, aware of what this is when you see it. You won't see it on my screen because I've actually got, I've already set mine up. But if you guys launch for the first time, you will likely see that. Okay, so a few other things that we've got in here. We've got tag rotation improvements. We've also got some nice things with void cut family geometry. And this is something that we'll want to talk a little bit about because there's some pretty interesting implications for this feature. We've also got some downstream connections with Inventor that have been introduced, and this is actually a pretty big deal. I'll be curious to see what all comes out of the Inventor link. And then last but not least, we have this kind of generative design tool that you've heard about. It's pretty cool, it's pretty nifty, and I'll show that live so you can see kind of what that does. For the variety of disciplines, we've got some cool things here and there. We've got a path of travel improvement for architects. We've also got slanted walls. Been a long time coming. Structure, you guys got a lot of love. We'll talk some about what you've been kind of exposed to with the 21 features. They're fantastic. MEP, not quite as many, but still pretty significant. And it's important, I want to point this out, but Revit 21 had some major feature releases and the 0.1 and 0.2 releases that really affected MEP. And some of those features we're not really going to have time to talk about, but I want you thinking big picture that even the incremental releases for Revit are now starting to receive some pretty big features in them that have significant impacts for all of us. And then last but not least, we actually have an all new civil discipline inside of Revit. It's in its nascent stages, but you'll see this is really priming the Revit workflow for greater use in things like bridge design, for instance. It's another thing that I think we're going to see this really expand as a workflow, but for now, just know this is a pretty cool new feature. All right, so let's actually run through these feature by feature. Starting with kind of our platform here, let's talk about Dynamo 2.5. So as I mentioned a moment ago, Dynamo 2.5 is the thing that I believe to be the single biggest improvement in Revit 21. And I know as we tracked in the poll, not all of you are using Dynamo, but I really believe this is where a significant portion of our future in design technology is migrating to. Dynamo allows us to offer powerful design automation solutions within Revit, and it's a tremendous efficiency booster. So, if you want to ramp up with your Dynamo skills, reach out to me directly. I'm a huge proponent of it, and I'd love to see more of you using this awesome tool. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox there. So Dynamo 2.5 features for real. So first, Dynamo 2.5 is shipped with Revit, which means there's no need to install. There's nothing you have to do, anything fancy to get it up and running. It comes inside of Revit. I will launch it when we go into the demo portion, so you can see how that works. Something that all of you Dynamo users are familiar with is custom packages. And what these are is essentially community-developed code blocks that can be downloaded for free. And they are absolutely essential to design scripts in Dynamo, and they've traditionally been a pain in the butt to manage, especially across an office and across multiple users. And I have really good news. Dynamo 2.5 has largely eliminated that by introducing this super useful package automation manager that allows users to directly install these packages into Dynamo. So I'll actually show you that feature live. It's super quick, super easy, super awesome. The other thing, and there's a lot of other things, but I guess the other thing I want to kind of mention is that we've actually undergone a total rewrite of the Python shell in Revit. So how the code base for Dynamo communicates into Revit is through this shell. And this overhaul, it means in simple terms that Dynamo is massively faster. If you've ever worked with complex geometry or larger graphs, you know it can be a little slow, all things considered. It's not too bad, but man, this overhaul has unlocked completely new levels of computational design scripts. When I talk about, Revit positioning itself for the next decade, this is the stuff I'm talking about. You have to see it to believe it, but I'm telling you right now, the improvements with Dynamo 2.5 are absolutely incredible. So let's go ahead and jump to some of these other features. PDFs. So 2020, not 21, but 2020 allowed us for the first time to insert PDFs into Revit. Probably should have happened sooner, but we could finally insert them. This year, they've improved on that feature, and we can now link PDFs rather than actually insert them. And the same actually goes for images. And this is really a preferable workflow because it means we can easily track where PDFs and images are in a Revit project. And we can easily update these files if they change at any point in the course of a project. There's also this really nifty show button feature. So small but impactful. Moving along to the BIM 360 in a little bit more detail. BIM 360 project navigation has been slightly changed, and it seems like they do this with every Revit release. So this year is no different. But I'll tell you, I think that this change is an improvement. It's a subtle one, but it is nice. So they've added a search bar. They've added some better navigation flows. So it's easier and a little bit more intuitive to find files and to actually especially link files into your projects through BIM 360. So we've also got tag improvements. And I don't want to mislead you on this feature, but this isn't like the most incredible expansion. It's more of something that was added on top of something that was already there. So what this means is now all tags and all labels are now able to be set with to rotate with their component. Previously, there's only like a handful of these that could do this, a handful of tag types. You could actually change it inside of the family properties in the family editor. Now we can go a step further and apply this to just about anything from a section head marker to, as you see here, a furniture tag. So it's pretty nice. not game-changing, but it's useful. Now we've also got void cut changes, and this, you might be dismissive of this as like an odd little thing that Revit has changed, and that maybe it won't affect you. And you should know, if you're making that assumption, you're probably wrong. So let me explain why, because, in a nutshell, this feature has massive ramifications on the construction of families in Revit. Essentially, we're going to be able to toggle on and off geometry cuts inside of families with instance parameters that are assigned to these void objects. And they can also be controlled. I haven't fully tested this, but apparently they can be controlled to only cut certain family types and not others. And really what I think is you should be looking for more complex rule-based geometric modifications that happen within families because of this. So, anecdotally, I think it'll be really interesting to see how VDC groups use this feature to more efficiently manage things like modeling clearances for clash detection, and just general coordination. Personally, I love this feature, and I promise you that you're going to see some interesting things come out of this. Okay, now as we kind of hop over to the headliner, the generative design feature, I want to say it's actually not new to a lot of us in the industry. This is I guess a slightly improved version of the beta project Refinery that has been getting a lot of buzz in the computational design circles for last year. So first of all, this tool is a departure from the Refinery tool in that it's entirely inside of Revit, not Dynamo. And just like the Dynamo player for Dynamo, you won't need users to know a lick about Dynamo to run this. So what is this tool? I'm actually going to talk more about this when we jump into Revit, but just at a high level, I'll describe it as this. It kind of serves as a supplemental design aid that users can use to quickly iterate designs and explore possibilities in Revit through computational design. Probably I should have that written somewhere, but anyways. So next slide, we've got this Inventor connection, and I do want to mention this one and talk about it a little bit, because for those of you that aren't familiar, Inventor is Autodesk flagship 3D CAD for product design. So it's really used for mechanical design, documentation, and product simulation tools. For instance, a window manufacturer might build their true parts library in Inventor for what gets built in their factory. It's a really big part of that side of the industry. And it's a side that many of us that work in Revit aren't really familiar with, and that's okay. But I want to explain this to you. Revit is now able to directly link into Inventor, and this is game-changing. It means that certain segments of this product manufacturing industry are going to be able to actively collaborate and coordinate inside of a Revit project like never before. So it's using their AnyCAD tool, which allows them to access files from, and I'm going to put this in quotes, AnyCAD system. So the AnyCAD system allows Inventor users to access dynamic data from Revit inside of their Inventor models. And what this means is that they can actually attach their modeled components to the Revit model inside of Inventor. And as the design changes, the Revit design changes, the Inventor model is actually going to automatically update to reflect these changes. Let me say that again. The Inventor now automatically updates its model based on changes from the inserted Revit files. All that data that's inside Revit is now integrated into Inventor. Levels, elements, even shared parameters like CSI spec numbers. Anything and everything you want as a Revit user to share, you can. Big things are coming with this. So just want you guys to be aware that that's something that's changed. All right, architecture. So I guess it's time to talk about Revit slanted walls. I've done all this talking and I haven't even mentioned this. Come on, Anthony. So communities have been asking about this for years. And in fact, if you're a regular on the Revit forum like I am, you know that there's actually been a long-standing April Fool's joke that gets posted every single year claiming that slanted walls have been added to Revit. Well, the joke's ruined now because we finally got them. So all kidding aside, this is something we've been asking about for years because we've direly needed it, and we've needed it for years. So I'm going to show this one live. So I don't want to spend too much more time talking about it, but you'll see this tool is fairly easy to use and surprisingly robust. There's some more stuff that I'd like to see added, but I'm pretty dang pleased that we finally have this. So next thing that we're looking at here is another feature that I'm going to show live, which is real-time realistic views. The new visualization engine for this is definitely not best in class. It's not, but it is a huge improvement over the old realistic view. And I think at the end of the day, its value prop is pretty clear in that it's included with Revit, and it's pretty solid for the visualization, which you'll see. And combined with some of the new features like PBR, physically based rendering of materials. PBR was added, I think, in 2019 for the material library. Our ability to create rich visual environments in Revit, both rendered and real-time, they've come a long way. Now, this isn't going to match the quality of a third-party visualization app like Inkscape or Twinmotion for VR outputs, but it's also included, right? It's included with Revit, so there's no additional management or cost overhead. I'm pretty happy with this feature. So moving on to structure, you guys got a lot of love, like so much that we could do an hour-long webinar just on the structure features. Like, I'm not joking, and I'm gonna compress you into 2-3 minutes here, but there's a lot to unpack for the structure side of things. So rebar is one of them, and this is really continuing a theme that's been present for the last few years. That there's been a lot of improvements to rebar in Revit, and this year is no different. We're now able to add completely new standard rebar shapes. We can also add rebar to curvilinear forms. We can do things like customized rebar cover, like what extensions for the rebar and actually what cover is added in a bunch of different scenarios. There's a lot here. Again, we're not going to be able to talk about it all, but please, 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 if you're in the rebar business or anything like that, check it out. Okay, I'm going to get back on my Dynamo soapbox. Not really, but Dynamo for Revit is for everybody, and that includes structural engineers. If you're a structural engineer that's experimented with Grasshopper, which is another visual programming software, Grasshopper integrates with Rhino and Tekla, you might want to consider replicating that workflow inside of Dynamo and Revit now. We've got a whole bunch of new Dynamo nodes that are going to allow us to quickly automate large portions of the structural design and modeling process. Then this is something I'm actually going to be doing some testing with in the coming months. So keep your eyes open. Some other things just to quickly brush on with the structure is that we've got some nice new improvements to steel object editing. So we can customize a variety of settings within. We can actually go into a sketch mode and customize the way all of this is modeled inside the model environment. And then one last feature I think is worth mentioning is that they've opened up the ability to insert model elements in Revit to pretty much all views. So previously we were kind of restricted to, I think, maybe just plans and 3D views, but now we can actually put them into sections, elevations, framing elevations, all of that, which it seems like a minor thing, but man, it's nice. Just testing it out, I'm really thrilled that they actually added that feature. So MEP, again, I apologize. I'm mostly an architect and structural engineer focused, but for you MEP folks, there's been a couple of really nice things that have been added that I do want to talk about. And the first is work sharing enhancements. If you're working in a central model or a cloud model or anything that has work sharing capabilities enabled, you're probably well aware of the fact that traditionally when we've made modifications to an MEP element, and this example is a really nice one, it checks out the entire dang system that it's attached to. Not everything, but a big chunk of it. And they've overhauled that, completely reworked the way that kind of works so that you're now only checking out the specific element that you're working on. Another thing that I think for the MEP side, you're going to be really happy. And once you get used to it, you're going to hate working in older Revit versions. So MEP in general, I'm going to tell you right now that electrical got quite a bit of new features, especially relative to mechanical and plumbing. But electrical got a whole bunch of new capabilities added around electrical circuits, circuit naming, schedules. We have a whole bunch of new schemes that we can set up. I really think that this is another feature that once you get into 21 as an electrical engineer, it's going to be really hard for you to go back to older Revit versions. And then for the plumbing folks, the P&ID modeler that was available on Teams is now available inside of BIM 360, the next generation. And we can actually do all of our color coding and setup with those diagrams inside BIM 360 docs for Revit 21. And last slide that I'm going to talk about here is the civil infrastructure. Again, this is totally new. We've never had a civil and infrastructure discipline inside of Revit before, but you'll notice if you look up here, we've actually got a separate discipline specifically called infrastructure. And it really opens up a bunch of new things that we can do to manage elements of that category. And it's mostly, for now, centered around bridge construction and managing the importing and interoperability between InfraWorks, which is a significant part of a civil engineer's workflow, and Revit. We can now kind of bring these in back and forth. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into Revit Live. And I've already got a project open here. Let me just kind of show this to you. Here's this building. And I want to show a few things kind of in real time here. And then we can kind of open this up for questions. So first thing that I want to show you is actually the slanted wall tool. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to make a wall. WA is my shortcut for that. I can also come up here, right? And I'm going to draw a wall in this project. And I could just use an existing wall, but let me just do this for now. So here's a wall. Just kind of just hone in on that. And this guy right now, if I want to actually toggle it to be a tilted wall, I need to go into the properties of this wall. So I need to have it selected. And then I need to come up here into the properties. And in the properties, we've got in the constraints at the very bottom, this new parameter called cross section. And it's set to vertical by default. But if you click on this, you can actually toggle it to slanted. And by doing that, it's going to unlock a second parameter called angle from vertical. If you notice in here, it's still a completely vertical wall. But now we can actually modify this angle, and we can make it positive or negative all the way down to like 179.9 degrees, which don't do that. But if I were to put in something a little dramatic like 45, you'll kind of see that it just automatically pivots over 45 degrees. Pretty nice, right? And with that being said, I do want to make sure that I'm upfront with you and let you know that this thing actually cleans up really nicely. So if I have a second wall here, and I want to also make that an angle, how's that going to clean up, right? It'd be interesting to see exactly how that cleans up. If I go to my slanted setting and make this 45 as well, oops, let's go the right direction. I can actually trim these guys. Watch, it's not going to work for me because I'm doing this live. Okay, it worked. But, and there it goes. It cleans up quite nicely. And you're going to find as you play around with this that there is some amount of work that you're going to have to do to get these things to clean up just right, especially when you start adding different conditions and different wall types together. But just know from my initial testing, this is working better than I expected, really. So another question you might ask is, well, what all is this compatible with, right? Like, this is just a basic wall. Good news is that this is actually available for basic walls, curtain walls, and stacked walls. All of these can receive this. Now, it's probably, place the panels. All right, so, and here's kind of just a really rough curtain wall, and it's kind of cleaning up. It's not perfect. I would have to take some time to kind of configure this to get everything locked up clean. But just know that it is possible to get these to clean up. And if you check out my blog post I wrote earlier or last week, you can actually see an example where I've got these merging together at a 45 with a solid wall and a curtain wall. Let's go turn that back into solid wall. So another thing you might be asking is, well, what about like windows and doors? So first of all, I can actually put a door into here, and I can put a window into here. And in both cases, you're looking at that and you're like, well, that's not going to work. So windows and doors have also received the same feature. And if I click on the door, for instance, I can actually change that orientation. It's right here up at the top. And I can make that to slanted, and it's going to die into the wall. Look, obviously, this isn't a realistic scenario, but you can do it, right? Same goes for this window. We can actually make that slanted now. Maybe a more realistic example would be this thing at like 5 degrees. And then, you know, you can say, okay, look, I want that door to still be plumb 90. So we'll go change that to vertical. Maybe you need a bigger wall. But with all that being said, pretty easy, right? We can just set up our doors, windows, they can be hosted, independent, or match the slant of the wall as we configure that. All right, so now I'm going to shift gears here. I'm going to go to a different feature, and that's actually Dynamo. So if I go up to the Manage tab, in the Manage tab, we've got Dynamo and the Dynamo player here. Again, you know, it's about a 50-50. Some of you are familiar, some are not. Well, when I click on the Dynamo player, it's actually going to launch, I'm sorry, Dynamo, not the Dynamo player. It's actually going to launch, Dynamo. I thought I had a session open, but I don't think I do. So it's going to open Dynamo up, right? And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to quickly open a proof of concept that I've got, because I want to show you, I'm not going to run any Dynamo scripts or anything, but I want to show you really quick an example. This is a graph that I built for a client last year. And this is in 2.3, so it's not really configured for 2.5. It's probably not going to work, but it's also really dang big, and it takes a long time to run. And it also uses a bunch of custom packages. So you remember earlier that I was talking about custom packages and how when different users are using Dynamo, they need to have these packages installed. And previously, you had to come up here into the package manager and go find them and identify exactly what Dynamo packages were being used. And now, with this new workspace references feature, I can literally just click. It's telling me, hey, these are the things you don't have and that you need. I need this clockwork for Dynamo, right? If I come over here, I can kind of zoom in and say, all right, look, here's this guy, right? It's red, telling me I don't have it. So all I have to do is come up here and click Install Specified Version. Do I want to install that version? Yes. Yep. Click OK. It's going to take a minute, install, and then as soon as it does that, I'm good to go. And here's another nice thing. Traditionally, you would actually have to close and relaunch Dynamo. We don't have to do that anymore. Now, I can just come in here and run my graph. So I just wanted to show that really quick. And also, for those of you that are familiar with Dynamo, you might look at this and say, man, that's a big graph. You seem to be moving pretty smoothly through it. And that is true. So Dynamo 2.5 is way faster than its predecessors, and it is something that is, at this point in time, something that everyone should be making in their stretch goals to get familiar with to some level. All right, so just a couple more things I want to show you. I'm going to come up here and actually show you now the generative design tool. And the way this works is there's actually two different things that we need to do here. We need to create a study, and then we can actually explore the outcomes. I'm going to start by clicking on Create a Study. And what this is bringing up is a study that we're going to actually launch to set the rules for a generative design outcome. Revit out of the box is going to come with these three. It's going to come with this window views, 3-box massing, and a workspace layout. If you want to make more studies, you're going to have to do that inside of Dynamo. But for these three out of the box, I think they're a nice proof of concept. And I actually want to show you this 3-box massing to kind of show you what this looks like. So when I launch my study, it's going to bring up all of these variables, and these variables are, again, created inside of the Dynamo solution. But once I do this, I'm actually able to configure what I want here, right? So I can say, okay, look, I want this study to optimize, randomize, whatever. I'm going to say optimize. What that means is that we're actually not we're not just testing out a wide range of options. We're going to try to come up with the best option based on these variables. So I'm good with all these variables. I'm going to be testing out 3 boxes. I want to check their position and their height. And then what are my goals? Well, my goals can be currently the floor area. Do I want to minimize or maximize? And my surface area. Do I want to minimize or maximize? I'm going to maximize my floor space. I'm going to minimize my surface. I also want to make sure you're aware of this, but we can come back and change this as many times as we want. It's super easy to do. We also have a population size, which is tracking how many iterations are being tracked against, and then generations, how many times is this being iterated? And then how many seats are we going to have? I'm going to set this to 5, and what this is going to do is once I click generate, it's actually going to start running through and creating a study that tracks how many, in this case, 5 iterations look like in their best case scenario. And so those 5 iterations were iterated over, 20 times each, I think, or was it 10 times? I forgot already. But as we look in here, we can actually start to see these different studies. And again, I want you to divorce yourself from the mindset that this has to be massing or something. This can literally be anything inside of Revit. Anything. We're just using a really simple example here to show a series of boxes that we're testing out a variety of parameters on, right? A box height, X, Y, and so forth. And as we kind of look in here, we can see the inputs and the outputs and see what all is available to us. Once we find one that we think looks kind of up to par for what we're wanting, I can actually create this inside of Revit. And if I select this and create inside of Revit, it's actually going to make these masses in here. Now, it's probably not showing up because I don't have massing turned on. Let's go find my mass. And there it is, right? Let's go isolate this dude. And there's my consumed model element. So again, the generative design tool is something I'm really excited about, and I think there's going to be a lot of future innovation that comes out of this. And for all of you that are looking at this tool and wondering how could I possibly use this, let me know what you come up with. I'd love to hear. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. And for those of you that are looking for guidance, feel free to reach out, because this is the kind of stuff that I'm personally really passionate about. So I think we're coming up kind of at the 45-minute mark, if I'm right. Do we want to kind of open this up for questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a question here. One of them is, will Enscape work with 2021?
Good question. And I can tell you, I've actually got Revit 20 open, and you'll notice that I actually am an Enscape user. The answer is definitely, but maybe not today. So the way this kind of works is that anytime there's a new Revit release, you're going to have to wait for the developer of these outside apps to update their app for all the changes inside of 2021 in this case. With all that being said, I don't know if I should say this on a webinar, but it is possible for you to manually port your 20 version into 21. It might not work, but you can at least do that. But the long and short of it is, I would recommend that you wait, because I can promise you that the Enscape team is, if it's not out yet, they are all hands on deck trying to get Enscape ready for 2021.
All right, and this one is long, so bear with me. Can you elaborate on working with an inventor file in Revit? I'm interested in simplifying a huge 3D DWG file by converting to Inventor and applying a shrink wrap, and then importing into Revit.
That is fantastic. I love hearing that question, because I think that is absolutely, what you're talking about there is one of those things that I think is absolutely going to be a possibility with this new workflow. So I was testing out the Inventor round trip back up to Revit, and I haven't gotten to play around with it quite as much as I'd like. But what I'll tell you is that my observations are what it outputs is fairly flexible, but it will output a family of an RFA file that you can load into Revit. So, and the shrink wrap that you're talking about works. And in fact, I think it's an essential part of the round trip process. So offhand, I think what you're asking is not only possible, it's something that you're going to be able to, all of us will be able to do in the future.
That's fabulous news. I do have, someone said they have 2 questions, so let's get started. With the new
Open
wall
it up.
tools, will it be possible to use the attached top/base on the wall to the bottom of the stair? Alternatively, with the curved stair, is the same possible without having to do an MIP suite blend to get it to attach?
Like, I wonder if I know this guy. No, I was just dealing with a question about this recently. So I'm not honestly sure. I don't think that the attaching behavior has changed really with the slanted walls. And I can almost definitely, unfortunately, tell you that it's not for the spiral stair. You're still going to have to do your block to sweep approach. That's something I'd be interested to see if there is some exposure to the way stairs change, I guess the way they can be attached. But off the top of my head, I'm going to say no. I don't think that anything has changed in terms of the relationship with slanted walls connecting to stairs.
Good to know. And the second question is, an issue started in 2020 where if you have a system family, either a floor, ceiling, or topo that has curves and you mirror the plan, then if you need to make edits to those components with the curves, you will be unable to draw in correctly.
That's something that I'm not actually familiar with. So it's good to it's good to hear that that's not good to hear, but it's good to know about that. What I would say is, first of all, for all of you, if you're using Revit 21, I would not use it for a current project, right? Like anytime there's a new Revit release, you typically want to wait for bringing it into your production environment. But for testing and stuff, feel free, go crazy. My question would be with that issue, because there's some, there's a hotfix that was released 2020.2.1, and that hotfix fixed some explicit issues around families that have been upgraded from 19 to 20, and then from 20 to 20.2. And then the 2.1 hotfix was issued to resolve that. I'd be curious to see if that issue is still present in the 2020.2.1 hotfix. If it is, and if it is, then we can test that in here. I don't know, Alyssa, if there's a way that you could connect me with this person, I'd love to follow up on that.